I went through just, I would say, a really dark time. The anxiety, I definitely had some postpartum depression. My business got to a point where I physically couldn't do it myself. Go out there and do the things that make me feel alive and have an impact on the world. That's really important to me.
Emotional health coach and best-selling author, Dr. Nita Bouchon.
Dr. Nita Bouchon.
Natalie, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Oh my gosh, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good right now. I feel like I'm coming out of the postpartum, what do we call it? Blur?
The bubble.
Yeah, bubble. Yeah, let's call it a bubble.
Let's call
Sounds
it
cuter.
the blur, the bubble.
Yeah.
Okay, take us through that whole journey because I feel like we're getting you fresh from the blur. And this is the Brave Table, so we're just gonna lay it all out.
Yeah, well, I slept a 6-hour stretch last night, which, I mean, come on, I'm like a new woman today. Yeah, postpartum, wow. I thought pregnancy was challenging. I had no idea what I was getting in for with postpartum, and I had a really rough time, honestly. And from what I've started to really process around it is, you know, so much of my life, like so many of us, was wrapped up in achievement. The next thing, what am I doing? Constantly moving.
Yeah.
And when I was pregnant with my daughter, I naturally had to slow down. The nausea, the exhaustion, it was like nothing I experienced before. And so it kind of started that slow down. It was like a plant medicine journey I couldn't get out of.
Right.
And I loved it. And when my daughter was born, I mean, I just felt like this completely new version of myself was screaming to get out. And my old version was like, get back in the box, get back in the box. And so I'm coming up 7 months now. This entire journey has just been really surrendering and allowing the old parts of myself to fall to the wayside. And this new, which kind of feels like the real, not necessarily new, but the real version of myself to sink back into my body. And it feels incredible. I feel really great, and I'm still navigating it, but I went through just, I would say, a really dark time. The anxiety, I definitely had some postpartum depression.
Yeah, so let's like break that down because I know I've shared my bouts and we definitely connected on it when you were like still in the thickness.
When I was really in it.
When you were like in the throes, and you and your husband and your hubby and I, we were like jamming it out when we were on a boat thing earlier this year. And I'm like, oh man, I saw myself in that because that was exactly my story as well. Like nobody really prepares you for all of it, and people kind of just say it, you know, they kind of like gently like dabble in it, but they don't really say like, this is probably a big thing. And especially because I started doing a lot of research around, because that's just my brain, but around the ratio of high achieving women getting into postpartum depression. And it's a lot. It's like everyone. So take us through your journey and how was that? When did you recognize that there was something funky going on?
Pretty early on. So my birth, like so many women, was really not what I expected and was quite traumatic. And I had some PTSD from that. And I would have that kind of flash throughout the day. And when it would happen, I just had so much anxiety in my body that I just felt frozen and I didn't know what to do with it. So there was that. And then the anxiety kind of kept getting worse and worse. I kept feeling it more and more in my body, and I wasn't finding much relief. So I had this on one side, and on the other side, I was also so happy to have brought my daughter into this world and to be spending time with her. And it was very hard to understand because on one side, I felt more lost and sad than I'd ever been. And on the other hand, I felt more myself and grateful and happy than I'd ever been. And so that was really difficult for me to understand. And I would have these days where I just didn't want to get out of bed. I just wanted to lay with my daughter. My postpartum depression, I never felt disconnected from her, which I've heard is also a thing. I think everyone's experience looks different. I just wanted to be with her constantly. Part of the birth journey was when she was born. She got taken away from me right away. And I think that really rocked me, and I didn't want her to be taken away from me ever. I just wanted her there, and whenever she was, you know, a little bit further away from me, the anxiety, it's so hard to put into words how I felt, but it just kept creeping up. And I think it was around the 5-week mark that I really realized something was wrong. And I went and spoke to my doctor about it. And he kind of laid out all my options, and medication was the option that they recommended the most, and it didn't feel like the one I wanted to take. And for me, if it was, and I would have done it, but I said to him, can I just have a little bit more time, because I'm very fresh into this. I know my hormones are everywhere. My mum came over, she flew over from the UK, and I didn't have any family here, so having her over, just doing the basic things around my house, cooking for me, making sure I was eating, helping with laundry, looking after Noemi when I was showering, those little things started to really help, and I started to feel better. And then she went home, and it hit me all over again. And I think that was around the time that you and I had chatted, and Stephen didn't know what to do to help me, and I just decided, okay, you know what, I get to lean into something. So I got support. I got support looking after the baby, which was really, really great.
It's so good.
Then I would do things for myself again. I would go and do a cold plunge, or I'd go take a bath. I'd go take a walk, and just infusing little bits of my old life into my new life started to help me see the kind of sunshine again.
Yeah.
And I did some breath work. That was incredible. I started to read some books to understand how I was feeling, which is kind of how my brain works. Like, okay, if I understand it. And luckily for my experience, I was able to get through it without the medication, which I know is not the experience for everyone. And absolutely, there's no right or wrong. And so that was great. And then I went back to work, and it all kicked up all over again. And
wait, the anxiety kicked up all over again?
Yeah.
Okay, but so I want to stop you because I feel like the journey of anxiety in postpartum is so big and so real. And in terms of the bigness, I don't even think, like, for listeners and folks who are watching this on YouTube, I don't even think there are words that we can really relate, because I don't think I recognize the depth of those really big emotions until I got to the other side to actually know the contrast. And so, or seeing it in other friends like yourself, I'm like, oh honey, I feel it totally. Yeah. And there isn't a playbook, and I think it's interesting that the doctors wanted to put you on meds first. Yeah. So what I'm so curious about is when your mom came from, the UK, how was that? Was that like, in terms of like your relationship, did that take you back to childhood? Take us through that, because I know that for me, when Ajit's mother and my mother-in-law came from India, there was just a whole host of like all of these feels, and I feel like that part we don't necessarily talk about, like the allowing for support and receiving support, especially because we're so high strung and type A, wanting to do it all. Did that, your professional life and the way you did that spill over into now you needing that support and allowing for that?
Yeah, so yes to all of this. When my mum came over, I was able to see her in a completely different light to what I've ever been able to see her in. And I think that's the interesting thing about motherhood, is you don't get it till you get it. And I remember just watching her and being in such awe that she knew what to do, and she was so graceful with me, and she knew the right things to say. She knew when to walk away and when to come in a room. She knew when to take the baby or not take the baby. And growing up, me and my mum had a very tumultuous relationship, and I feel like it was incredible to have her there during that time and to have her show up for me the way in which she did. And I just got to see her in a completely different way. But I agree. I think all of these experiences bring up so much. So becoming a mother brought up stuff with my mum, but it was really amazing to be able to see her in an even different light. And I think it brought us even closer. And so it was really incredible. I will say I found it easy to accept support. Just for me in business, my business got to a point where I physically couldn't do it myself. And so I had to learn how to delegate, and I had to learn the difference between having it done and having it done to my preference. Because when you delegate, it's very rare someone's going to do something to your preference. Totally. And you have to have that window of allowance and window of tolerance for things not being your preference.
And there's no room for perfection in that when you're delegating.
No, there isn't, because it slows down the process. It makes people feel like they're losing their individuality. And so that part I found really easy. I didn't have guilt around accepting support, whether it's from my husband, my mum, for things I needed, for taking my time, or even when we brought in our incredible nanny. I didn't feel guilty about that because I knew this was best for me and therefore best for my daughter. And I still don't feel guilty about it. And I think business kind of prepped me for that.
I mean, it's so good. And it's one of the things that, even with mom guilt, that is one of the things that even for me, I've grappled with, because while I love what I do and all of the seasons of reinvention and all of the projects that come into our fold, in our table, and yet our kids are really small, and now there's 2, and then there's just, you know, the decision making, as you're talking about, there's now things that I'm like, okay, I can't open myself up to anymore, and I have to be clear on my no's, and I have to be clear on, you know, who we're actually allowing to be in that support circle. And for those thinking that, you know, this idea of having to be this martyr and doing it all in terms of business and having your own ambitions, and I kind of say, like, this is the next chapter, next evolution of you. So now 7 months in, coming out of this, where are you at in terms of your next evolution of who is Natalie now?
Everything's changed. And I completely agree. I think everyone reevaluates. When you bring babies into the world, you really reevaluate, and everyone's journey looks so different. And for me, my ambition, or my relationship to my ambition, changed completely, in a sense of I still have my ambition and I still want to go out there and do the things that make me feel alive and have an impact on the world. That's really important to me. And I want to work in a way that fills my cup. So I think there's a couple of different ways we can work. We can show up at work and we can have this full cup and we just slowly pour it out to everyone and everything else, so that when we go to snuggle with our baby, we feel like there's nothing left in the tank and we're giving from that empty space. I noticed that when I first went back to work. I noticed I was trying to work in my old paradigm, in the way I'd always worked, and then show up in my new role, in the new paradigm, in the new version of me, and there was this conflict, and it was very challenging. And I was really honest with my mentors and the people around me about that, and I got support on being able to reshape my calendar, reshape how things work, because I know where my priorities lie. And from that, I've started to work in a way that fills my cup. So even if, you know, you have a sleepless night and I turn up at work and I feel like my cup's not fully full, I do the things that fill it up. And then when I step out to go feed my daughter, or when I go on a walk with her and my husband in the nighttime, I'm going on a walk with a fuller cup. And that's what feels good. And that's what feels very different to when I first went back.
And let's talk about all of the feels with our partners, because obviously Stephen's been such a big supporter in terms of every step along the way. How has the dynamic been in terms of, like, okay, in it, postpartum, all of the feels, all of the things, and how was that dynamic finding your next footing with Stephen, and then now this new iteration of you guys?
Our relationship just changed so much. You know, the first couple of weeks we were just in this bubble and it was incredible, and then Stephen went back to work and I really struggled with that because I took a longer maternity leave than
And how long did you take?
I took 3 months.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh, so good.
Just 3 months no work. I knew I wanted that. Honestly, I probably would have taken longer, but I didn't know, and next time I will.
Yeah.
He took less time, and so we were in this bubble and we were navigating this new life together, and then I experienced him as kind of going off and going back to his life very normally. He was back in his office, and you know, he's not feeding the baby throughout the day, so I wasn't seeing him a lot throughout the day, and I felt like a lot of it fell on me. And that was my story, that I'm holding a lot more weight, which also I think is generally the case. I was holding a lot more weight and I found that very difficult, and I was still navigating a lot of my own emotions and hormones and feelings, and I really took that out on him. I started feeling resentment towards him. I didn't really want to spend the time pouring into our relationship. I didn't want to work on things with him. I didn't want to have the conversations because there was this resentment building, and I had to notice that for myself and take responsibility for it and clean it up. And he was very graceful with the whole process. He kind of didn't understand it, but he would witness me in it, and he wouldn't buy into my stories around it, and we'd just have really honest conversations. And so I started doing my own work around that and having honest conversations with him about what I do need, and giving him a roadmap, giving him like clarity on that. That's been much better. And I would say we're in a place now where it feels like we're really prioritizing our love and our relationship and each other again. And it feels like we're getting to meet new versions of each other, and it's incredible to watch him as 2.0, 3.0, whatever, as a father and as a support system and everything. It's incredible. But listen, there were moments where I was like, I think I might be getting a divorce. Don't know that's I'm gonna be a single parent right off the bat.
I feel like, I mean, this is the Brave Table, and I feel like, yeah, we would be lying to you if that wasn't the case that comes up in every like conversation in terms of like the whole postpartum when you're in it. Like, I remember just the hardest time for us was like when we moved, when I was pregnant with Isla, and it was like I was so sick, like up to 10 times a day at some point. And it wasn't really hyperemus, but maybe it was, but it was like occasionally, but it was enough to like take me out fully.
Once a day is enough.
Once a day is enough. You get up to 10 times and you're kind of like,
Peace
okay,
out.
what is going on? So I remember I was just a hot mess. And then you're having, I have a 2-year-old at home running around, and then we were moving here as well. So it brought up all the feels, and we couldn't find support being in a new city. And so we were just like two tiny, jigsaw puzzles trying to fit in, and he's trying to support me the best he could. And I was just in my own mental stir of emotions of thinking like, oh, he's not helping me enough. But then I couldn't share how much I needed him to support me in the ways that I needed, because I hadn't figured it out yet. And so I think, what I loved about what you just said is, taking responsibility to clean that part up. And I think for so much, it's so easy to pour off the blame into other folks and that's where like that radical self-awareness piece comes in that goes, oh, okay, I'm doing that. That's my own stuff that's coming up constantly. And okay, here's what's happening again, because my story has always been like abandonment because of my losses and things like that growing up. And so that was happening again of abandonment. But I'm like, wait a minute, where am I abandoning myself, where I'm not getting the support that I actually need? And so I love that you're like, well, taking responsibility and owning it. And so I want to jump ship here and talk about our next phase of conversation, which is our little lightning round. What are you braving right now in this season of life?
I'm making some big decisions around work and perhaps stepping back from the role in which I've played in my business. So that's a long time coming, and I'm ready.
That is huge. That's big, love. How was that process?
Incredible. Just learning to speak my truth and figure out where I'm at. I worked so hard to get to the point I'm at that to move on to a next chapter, you often need to make those big decisions. And I could see my next chapter, and I knew I needed to make some big decisions to stretch into that. And I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready for that next chapter. And to go into those chapters, you need to make big decisions. You need to get uncomfortable. And for me, I knew the decisions I was making were right when I was very emotional making them, and the lightness that took over my body once I just said it out loud, that's when I knew.
And I love that you just said that, because we kind of hold it when we have this like super uncomfortable feeling, and we tend to hold it in our chest and tend to hold it inside. And then sometimes it's just like bursting a wallow of tears. But then you're like, oh, wait, that was the worst thing. I said it out loud. And I actually acknowledged what I want, because I think a lot of times, especially when we're doing partnerships and things like that, we're so afraid of like letting the other person down. We're so afraid of like, what is this going to do for all of the things that can come up around that, of like disappointment, people pleasing, all of that. And then here we are. Amazing.
Feels good.
It's good. Leaning into the discomfort, or what I call leaning into the suck.
Yeah.
And some of those sucky conversations conversations, because sometimes those sucky conversations, they build new bridges, they build new connections. Like you and Steven have now this powerful, really tight relationship. You and your mom have really kind of built that bridge, and seeing her in a different perspective and light, which is like so huge. What is something, a ritual or a book or practice that you are finding super nourishing in this stage of motherhood?
Solo time in absolute silence. I used to have rituals around journaling and meditating and almost doing things to slow down. What I'm really loving now is in the morning just taking my coffee into my room and just being. Not meditating, not journaling, not scrolling, not reading, just being, just sitting in the silence and the nothingness. And that is where I'm getting so much of my energy from, so many of my ideas, being able to listen to my inner voice. Because when you have kids, there's a lot of overstimulation happening. And that's a lot. I'm very introverted. I've really tried to make a practice of taking my coffee and just being, just sitting, whether it's 5 minutes or 15 minutes. That fills me up. And taking I need to meditate for X amount of times, I need to do X, Y. No, I'm just going to sit. I'm just going to be. I'm going to savor every sip of this coffee and be in the present has been the most incredible thing. And I don't need any fancy tools to do that. Just a good old cup of coffee and a quiet room.
Isn't that, it's like the simple things.
It's the simple things.
It's the simple things. For me, I'm like, I used to preach that, really long self-care time. And you're like, actually, I'll be surprised if I only have like 5 minutes to make that chai.
Yeah.
In the crushing of like the cloves and the cardamom and the cinnamon, putting it in that in and of itself, I can enjoy the 5 minutes.
Yeah. Smelling it, just being with it versus like rushing, going. Got to make the chai, got to get the journal out, got to do the and then instead we just slow down, savor it, and before we know it, the making of something was actually the slowing down that we needed.
That was it. I mean, it's why the Japanese, they did a really good job of
like crushing it.
We
need to listen.
We really need to listen. The tea ceremonies, the pouring back and forth. I mean, I've definitely been loving all of the practices that the Japanese have around these rituals, where we're all about like all of the things, but no, there's a whole savory moment even in the act of pouring and making. And so what does bravery mean to you now?
Bravery to me means authenticity. It means being willing to really lean into what is for you and lean into when it's uncomfortable, having those conversations with others or yourself, and just finding out what is at your core, what are your deepest desires that you're not speaking out into the world, that you're not putting out into the world, and how can you do more of that?
So good.
And it feels so good.
So good. All right, and last question. What word describes this season?
Confidence.
Natalie Ellis, amazing, love. Thank you for sitting with us on the Brave Table.
Thanks for having me.